Okay, I think we're at the hour mark. I won't say what hour because I know we have attendees and panelists from all over the world. Welcome, everyone. I'm just gonna see if I can share my screen with a few housekeeping tips. So the first one to say right now is you can, if you want, enable live transcription. So you can get the transcription as well. These sessions will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube as well. Welcome to TG Conference 2021. I'm Parama Chaudhury. I'm the director of the Center for Teaching and Learning Economics at UCL, who's organizing this conference, along with my colleague Clodagh Jenkins, also from UCL, and Doug McKee from Cornell. This is the second time that we're running this conference. So last year, we ran it kind of in response to C3, which a lot of us go to being canceled. But the feedback we got was that there is a bit of a demand for a free online sort of practice-focused session, especially on Econ Ed, even though, as we'll talk about in just a second, a lot of the issues that we face, a lot of the sort of solutions that we have overlap with other fields as well. So we figured might as well go ahead and do this. So thank you for your support in that. Hope you have a great time over the next 3 days. If you haven't registered for the other days yet, you can still do so. We have a fantastic set of sessions, and then on the last day we have another panel like we have today. There will be a feedback form coming your way, so please do fill that out. Or if you have any comments, questions, anything at all, get in touch with one of the co-organizers, so me, Clodagh, or Doug. If you go on our Twitter or on our website, you'll see all the contact details. And please do use the hashtag to get in touch with us, to continue the conversation on social media. So we have 2 sessions each day, starting with this one, which is, of course, the plenary panel. And that's the first time I think I've managed to say it correctly. We've also tried to add in a bit of interaction, which obviously all of us find that that's kind of the best part of the in-person conferences. So each day after the main sessions, there's a network mixer. These mixers are sponsored by a different tech company each day. So you'll get to know a little bit about their products and ask them questions if you're using their products already. But the largest part of those sessions is left for breakout room discussions. The breakout rooms are themed by the conference sessions. So if, for example, after this panel, you want to continue the discussion on this topic, there'll be a breakout room for that. But of course, if you want to know more about ECHO, MobLab, or ED, which are our 3 sponsors, you can stay in the main room and talk to them as well. You should have received the links for all of these. If you haven't, look in your spam box, or we have a fantastic set of helpers behind the scenes. So any logistic questions, you can drop them in the chat as well. This current session, which we've organized, like I said, as a panel, but it'll be very much sort of me asking the panelists questions, and then of course opening up to the audience as well. The topic is a year of blended economics education, taking stock and moving forward. So we have 2 of our panelists are from Econ Ed, 2 of our panelists are just from education more generally, and we'll have a bigger sort of more overall view of different subjects. And I guess what we're trying to do here is to kind of continue the discussion from last year. So last year we also started with a panel, which then was, I've forgotten the exact name, but I think it was, what new hell is this new year going to be, kind of thing. And I think at this point, we've seen the kind of hell. I think some of us are still kind of shell-shocked from that. But I think we've also learned quite a lot. So obviously, we've learned how to deal with various curveballs that have been thrown our way. But we've also had to make changes, definitely in our case, that perhaps would have taken much, much longer to think about, operationalize, whatever, if the pandemic hadn't basically forced our hands. Some of these have turned out to be pleasant surprises. Some of these, I think, have reiterated that the old way was better. But there's definitely lots of lessons learned, and I'm hoping in this panel today we can sort of bring some of those together, answer some questions about those, and in general, sort of try to figure out how we can make education, higher education, slightly less exposed to the kind of global risk that we faced this year and feels like we may face again. But it's just highlighted some issues that we've already had. And then also how to operationalize lessons learned in a non-crisis mode. So all the stuff that we've learned, even if we're not forced to do it, even if we're not responding to some kind of huge issue happening, how do we actually start doing that? So we're going to start the panel, as I said, with some pre-prepared questions from myself for each of the speakers, and then open up the floor to questions. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A rather than the chat. And you can upvote questions as well. So what I'll try to do is I'll try to get as many of the most popular questions asked as possible. But we will try to answer the remaining questions as well, put them up as a doc on the CTEL site afterwards. So those of you who were present last year will know that we've done that. Plus we have student partners who will be working on a blog on each of these sessions. So your questions will not be wasted. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing and go ahead and introduce our speakers and jump into the questions. So we have, and this is in order on my screen, Gail Hoyt from the University of Kentucky, Derek Bruff from Vanderbilt University, Jennifer Imazeki from San Diego State University, and Joshua Eyler from the University of Mississippi. And we were all chatting about how we have a variety of, even within the US, time zones represented here, and I know amongst our guests also. And a special, sorry to the Californians, of course, but also to the Aussies. We do have some Aussie guests, which is a little of the, I don't even want to think about it, but thank you. Thank you for your support. Thank you for coming. First question to Gail, and Derek, I'm essentially going to ask you the same thing. You've had obviously a long experience in the field of education, the field of economics education. You've done a lot of work with the American Economic Association's Committee on Economics Education. So based on sort of all of that, if I were to ask you to pick one highlight of the past year, so either from the point of view of students or the staff perspective, what would it be? And if you can tell us a little bit about your work as well, that would be great.
I'm at the University of Kentucky. I've been there for 27 years, and I've been teaching for 33 years, so I've been around a while. I normally teach a large lecture of microeconomic principles with 450 to 500 students, and then a senior seminar on the economics of altruism. And pre-pandemic, I had never taught online. So no online experience whatsoever, and obviously that changed. And so Parama, thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel. It has been nice now that my head is above water again to look back and think, what the heck happened? And what does it mean going forward? And I know most of you are probably in that same process. So this really helped me. So Parama, I'm going to kind of cheat and try to give you a 3-for-1 bargain, because 3 things stood out to me, but I'm going to do it in the time I would have done 1. Okay. And I have no PowerPoints, but I do have visuals. I drew for you guys. You can teach an old dog new tricks. This is my realization number 1. I drew a dog for you guys. I've been teaching for a long time, and I always try to grow and evolve, but I realized I'm a tweaker, meaning I make changes very gradually, very incrementally. I'm also a late adopter. I use a lot of technologies, but I wait for a few years when they come out for other people to work out the kinks. Then when I'm ready, I want somebody else to figure it out and tell me how to do it. So that's how I operate. And so, as much as I believe in a growth mindset for my students, I realized I don't operate with a growth mindset myself for my own teaching. And it was kind of embarrassing when I had that realization. But when the pandemic forced us to transfer everything in a week, there's no room for tweakers and late adopters. You had to do everything quickly, and you had to figure out a lot of stuff on your own. And, much to my surprise, I did it. So I never thought at 55, at this point in my career, I would feel that kind of re-energizing, kind of being reinvigorated, and kind of liberating to know that I can have a growth mindset and I can learn to do stuff on my own. So I kind of view that as one of the gifts of the pandemic, that I learned old dogs can learn new tricks. And while I don't want to relive the pandemic again, I am grateful for the gifts. Just seeing how faculty and students can be resilient, creative, how they can adapt. And in the econ ed community, there's been this very strong spirit of generosity where you've seen educators around the world helping each other as we've tried to kind of navigate what's going on. So that was realization number one. Number two, online education is not pure evil. That's a monitor with devil horns, in case you can't tell what I drew. Um, I've been teaching long enough that I remember when there was no online education, and I remember watching it emerge and watching it evolve. And I will confess that I have always been an avid opponent. There's just something about face-to-face for me, the energy, and the kind of momentum you can generate that I think is hard to replicate in other settings. And people coming together with a common purpose. I just think there's a kind of energy and almost a magic. That's not maybe the right word, but that's what I love about teaching. So I've always been very opposed to online, but like many of you with the pandemic, suddenly I was being asked to do something that I've never wanted to do, but I had to suddenly think about the positives. What are the positives and how do I go about achieving them in this setting where I never really imagined myself? And I will now confess with hindsight that it's not pure evil. I still prefer face-to-face, but I don't think online is a completely evil thing. And, there's no denying the increased accessibility. I had students in quarantine who were sick who were attending class through Zoom. So I think the accessibility is important. I had never tried a flipped model, and with my courses that had asynchronous and synchronous combined, I did, and now I believe all the people who told me it can make for a richer experience. And as much as I like the energy and excitement of a face-to-face experience, I realized when I was teaching synchronously through Zoom, you can get a kind of intellectual intimacy. Does that make sense? A kind of intimacy that I had never seen before. So, I hope going back to face now, I can try to take the things I liked about these other models and take it back into the face-to-face experience. All right, last one, number three, something different is mandatory. Normally at this point in the summer, this one's the most cryptic, and I couldn't think of what to draw. But as I think about the fall, since I'm a tweaker, I'm not too nervous. I might make a few little changes here and there, but I have never before in my career thought about a fall semester where I have felt so compelled that what I do has to be different than what I've done before. And certainly part of that is that the pandemic has transformed things, and I feel like we have an obligation to take what we've learned and use it and not just write it off as a one and done. But the other salient feature of the last year and a half is the social unrest we've seen globally. And there's been a lot of momentum for social change that's transforming the academy. And I think that compels us all to figure out, how do we make economics more accessible to everybody? And so for me, the conviction I feel going into the fall is to bring those lessons from the pandemic into how I teach, and also to figure out how to increase accessibility. So I'm going to be thinking in the fall a lot about more inclusive learning environment and inclusive pedagogy. And, I've realized that good teaching evaluations are not an indicator of your true reach. They're not going to tell you necessarily if you're really extending the reach to everybody in your class. And I think I am going to work harder now that I'm in a growth mindset of being brave. When we teach economics, I think we teach a lot of other things. Are we teaching our students to have civil discourse? Are we teaching them to have informed opinions? Are we going for the issues and the heavy examples, or are we only gravitating toward the light, easy stuff to talk about? And so, I think the pandemic taught us that we are capable of sweeping change in how we teach. And so I hope that I can maintain that growth mindset and continue to evolve. So I'm looking forward to what the other panelists have to say, because I think they're going to help me figure out what my different class in the future is going to be like. So that's kind of where I am.
That was great. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Gail. And I love the intellectual intimacy. And I think I feel the same way, but hopefully we can come back to that as well. And you've actually picked up on a lot of stuff that, hopefully the others will get to as well. Derek, same question, but I know you do work with people in different fields as well. So I don't know if you can say something about sort of, did you see different things in different fields, or did it feel like one big sort of similar experience? And so a little bit about yourself and then highlights.
Sure, and I am at an Airbnb in Carlsbad, New Mexico right now, and there's a lot of roosters crowing, so you may hear them in my background. Yeah, so I've been at the Vanderbilt University Center for Teaching for about 16 years actually this summer. Last year, by some measures, we packed about 10 years worth of professional development into 4 months at our center. It was epic. We've been well resourced and we have a good team, and so we were able to move pretty quickly. And we spent April designing a 2-week online course design institute for our faculty. And then we just offered it every 2 weeks all summer long and had about 500 faculty move through it. And so that was a big lift for us, but our campus needed it, right? We had, we're at an institution where outside of our School of Nursing, there's very little online teaching traditionally. And so we had a lot of faculty very new. We knew we'd be teaching online in the summer and probably big online components in the fall. And so we had to do this. And I guess, one of the things that amazed me, not only was it 10 years of professional development offerings in 4 months, but I felt like it was 10 years of culture change in about 4 months among our faculty. And so, we actually surveyed our Online Course Design Institute alumni in December, and one of the questions we asked them is do you agree with the statement that students can learn effectively online? And I wish I had a pre-measure of that from like last February, because our post-measure was like 85% or something agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. And I know it wouldn't have been that much a year prior. And so when I hear folks like Gail say, I've never tried these flipped classroom elements before, and now I have, and I see so much value in these that I'm going to keep doing this in some fashion. Or I love that she mentioned different ways to engage students. I think one of the things that a lot of faculty learned on teaching on Zoom was that there's more than one way to be an active participant in a classroom. You don't have to be a student who raises their physical voice, right? There's other ways to practice inclusive assessment. And so I think I see all of these lessons that faculty across the disciplines have learned. And I expect a lot of them will continue to use these lessons going forward. And I think they'll be more open to, again, Gail, I loved your pre-measure, which was online teaching is evil, right? Like we had a lot of faculty who were in that boat. And so now they're not. And I think that's gonna just open up the doors for, the way I think about it, so I'm not an economist, I am a mathematician by training. And so I just kind of think about, it's like Venn diagrams, right? Like the more tools you have in your toolbox, the more options you have by definition. And so it allows you to be a more effective teacher. And so I'm kind of excited about the kind of back to the classroom moves that we're making this summer and this fall to see kind of what sticks and how we can meet our students' needs better.
That's great, Derek, and yeah, I completely agree with the Venn diagram issue. Also, the sort of metaphor we've been using also is that you go into a store and you select the things that go into your consumption basket, right? And there's lots of things there, and everyone's basket will be slightly different.
Yeah.
But there are those things there, so it's not like there's been an empty store. The store's been there. You just haven't been shopping there. So hopefully people will start to shop a little bit more. Yeah. I'm actually intrigued that there's a lot of issues about accessibility, students having different types of sort of approaches, giving different ways for students to learn. So Jennifer, I'm gonna come to you and ask about your work. I know you've been working with faculty and staff diversity and inclusivity for a while now. And we know that in many countries, ethnic minorities, women, other marginalized groups have been affected more than others, either due to actual illness or due to working conditions, all kinds of things like that. Sort of the point of view of the university environment, what are the key takeaways, do you think, with respect to inclusive sort of an inclusive education model in terms of students, but then what do you think is key for staff as well?
Sure. Thanks. I think most folks here probably know me because of my work within Econ Ed, but I was the director of our Center for Teaching and Learning for several years, and then moved into my current role as an AVP for faculty and staff diversity. Sadly, that actually happened in 2019. So we had a new director of our Center for Teaching and Learning just as all of this hit. So my poor colleague there, but I continue to kind of do that work in what I'm doing now. And, you know, as Parama pointed out, I think the impact of COVID has not been the same for everyone, right? In the US, we've talked a lot about the twin pandemics of COVID-19 and social injustice, but that's also a worldwide issue because the disproportionate impact of COVID on marginalized groups across the world, it's not just random, it's not an accident, right? I do think that one of the upsides, if you can call it that, of COVID has been an increase in the awareness of faculty and staff of the need for empathy, for flexibility, for grace. I think most folks have recognized that when we shifted to remote, we couldn't just assume that everyone was equally able to manage the same kind of workloads. And that goes for both students and faculty and staff. So my sense is that most faculty, and I'm guessing certainly the faculty who would come to an event like this, have made a lot of allowances, right, and tried to be more flexible. And that is something that I really hope we don't lose when we start to go back to in-person operations. I do worry that there will be a tendency to sort of return to old ways, to think that, you know, we're just going back to normal, whatever that is. But I really think it's important for all of us to hold on to as much of that empathy and grace as we can. We need to remember not just that the impact has not been the same for everyone over the last year, but that the return to normal is not going to be the same for everyone, right? For some, that's because they're dealing with the aftermath of COVID, whether that's you know, dealing with grief from losses, figuring out childcare because there's a lot of variation still in what's happening with schools, or simply not feeling safe. And again, this goes for everyone, students, faculty, and staff. People are in lots of different places mentally about how comfortable they feel being in spaces where people may or may not be fully vaccinated. I know that on our campus, we are not yet at the point where we're requiring everyone to be vaccinated. That will happen when one of the vaccines is like fully approved and not just under emergency approval. So that means there's some folks, some faculty who have been very resistant to going back into the classroom because they don't think all of their students will be vaccinated. Similarly, there are students who don't want to be there because they don't know which of their classmates will be vaccinated. In general, I think the other thing going forward that people, and this goes along, is really along the same lines, but I think mental health is going to be huge, not just physical health, right? And again, more so for those from more impacted communities. If anyone has not yet learned anything about trauma-informed pedagogy, I think now is a good time to be thinking about that. And just to be clear, again, it's not only our students who are dealing with those mental health issues. Faculty, staff, and I should probably also add administrators are all burnt out, right? Gail mentioned that she's doing a lot of thinking this summer about this fall. Well, no faculty didn't get a summer last summer either, right? So faculty in academia, we're used to having breaks at certain points and time to recharge, and no one has gotten that. And in some cases, really, I know on my campus, we canceled spring break. We sort of spread that out, which makes, you know, the burnout and the exhaustion all the harder. So I just want to go back to, really encouraging people to be thinking about not only for others, but for ourselves, to be kind, to give grace. And I'll leave it there.
That's great, Jennifer. Thank you very much. And I think I do like the stress on grace, particularly. It really sort of summarizes it really well, that it doesn't really hurt to be kind and to be sort of tolerant of people's situations. And I completely agree with you. I think many of the inequalities that have been reinforced have always been there. We've been in a situation, we've been privileged enough, if you want to call it that, to be able to ignore them or something like that. You know, I don't think I would call it privilege, but whatever it is. But at this point, it's not quite, you know, it's so stark that we need to sort of start thinking about it. There is, I'm going to get to Q&A in a second after I asked Josh the final sort of open question, but there's a question, Jennifer, about any resources for some of the things you talked about. I'm going to move on, and of course, to the attendees, feel free to drop questions into the Q&A. I'll come to them. I can see that our panelists have been super active answering some of those as well. So Josh, coming to you, kind of, all of this has kind of worked towards some of the questions that I planned in any case. We have talked about how well faculty have adjusted, how they've learned, you know, old dogs learning new tricks, and at the same time, they're being impacted by the same kinds of things happening. So illness, but also, you know, workload issues, no summers. It's in fact, in our university, we have instituted something called a quiet week, just because it seems to be we've been going since January 2020, right? That there hasn't been a time to stop. So my question for you is, you have worked for a while in faculty development, obviously working with faculty and so on. What do you think sort of the big lessons from this year that we've had about how to support faculty best, and how to develop these sort of skills so that the next time we're hit by something like this, we're all in a position to react in a you know, not actually freak out and have these skills and develop these skills so that we can do something about it, recognizing the fact that, you know, it's a huge pressure on faculty as well. Right.
Okay. So thank you for that question. I'll try to cover some of them anyway. But I want to say from the outset, I'm not at an Airbnb in New Mexico, but I am in my campus office, which we returned to last week, and I have this little halo of light that makes it look like I'm in a Renaissance painting, but that's unintentional, I promise. Okay, so here's I think at the top of my list of what I learned about working with faculty during this time are two things. One is that what I observed kind of at my own institution and kind of across higher ed in the national conversation is that faculty were largely being left out of the conversation, that there was a lot of emphasis on students and what students needed in student learning. And then there was a lot of stuff about protocols and policies and things that administrators deal with, but the day-to-day reality of faculty or teaching, you know, day in and day out, we didn't talk about it, or it wasn't being talked about very much. And I think that was a missed opportunity in many important ways. And connected to that, I think the other important thing that I learned is that just like we were talking about having an empathetic approach to students as human beings and the effect of the pandemic on their ability to learn and work, that is absolutely true for faculty and staff as well. And so the emotional and psychological responses to the pandemic, especially early on, were definitely having an effect on the way faculty were able to conceptualize teaching in new environments, their ability to kind of improvise at a moment's notice, kind of shift modes entirely. And so I think that when at my own institution, when we first started kind of helping this emergency shift to happen, we took a really utilitarian approach. You know, what do you need? Here's some technology that you might consider. Do you have learning goals that you can transfer? But what I quickly saw was a range of kind of emotional responses that went far beyond anything a utilitarian approach could address. It was really kind of a Band-Aid over a much larger issue. So I was seeing a lot of sadness, a lot of anger, a lot of frustration in ways that, about things that you might not see those emotional responses typically. And so we took a different kind of approach that I hope we continue, and that has certainly taught me a lot about faculty development in crisis. And that was to really address those emotional components. In one way, that meant kind of stopping with the utilitarian approach and talking to them about what they loved about teaching in face-to-face environments, what they miss about those interactions, what kinds of interactions they found most meaningful, and how could I help them kind of replicate that as much as possible in these new environments. So addressing that element head on, but then paying attention to the things as well that Jennifer was talking about, the burnout, the cost, the extreme cost of this year at plus on faculty morale, faculty kind of approach to their work. And I think that's not only vitally important, but it touches areas of our work in higher education that we might not be thinking about. There's a great question in the Q&A about what's going to happen in the fall when students request to not be in class and have faculty doing all of this kind of high flex work. And that to me is that's an issue that institutions need to handle and think about. That should not be a burden any individual faculty member faces. That should be something that is addressed at the institutional level. As faculty are burned out, they shouldn't have to confront those particular issues. So I think that's how we'll see it kind of rolling forward in faculty development over the next year or so.
That's a great answer. And yeah, I was gonna follow up with that question. So I'm glad you kicked that off. I think, so the question was about how to manage student expectations for the coming year. So as Josh mentioned, there may be students, and we've done quite a bit of evaluation work in our institution. And what we found is that at least for econ students, they absolutely love the flexibility. The async learning, I can learn on my own time. I can sort of put the bits together and with the convex combination of what works for me. They really love those bits. That going away, I could see going down like a bomb. So they're not there like that at all. At the same time, it's going to be difficult, or at least resource intensive, to have different models for different people. I'm going to just sort of tack on another question to that for the panel. There's been this discussion in the UK also about, going back to Gail's point about online being evil or not evil, that because of how much has already been online, and perhaps that will be online, who knows what the future will bring, fees should be reduced. So tuition fees should be reduced. There's a whole other cultural context here in the UK about fees, but I think one of the things that I'm getting, so I've been reading a lot in the popular media about this. One of the things I'm getting is that students are not really saying that online is evil. That's not what they're saying. They're saying that their university experience has been disrupted. Of course, so everything that goes into the university has been disrupted. And much as we would all like to see from September, we're back to normal, including clubs and parties and all of that stuff, possibly not going to happen. So any tips from the panel? Gail, if you're okay with me starting back with you again, how do we manage expectations of students in a way that we can sort of satisfy them, deliver on the things that are within our control, and sort of make it easier for them to understand that there is this uncertainty. You have to live with this uncertainty.
I'm not sure I have a great answer for this, but I was being interviewed for something on my campus, and they asked me about going back in the fall. And one of the things I had always taken great pride in my large lecture is I would get about a 95% attendance rate in my class of 500. And I've spent years tweaking, because I'm a tweaker, how I do everything to try to achieve that. And I've always felt like that's really, really important. And, in thinking about going back, I've realized, it is going to be an issue enforcing attendance. And I wish Josh would talk to the administrators on my campus and say it's their responsibility, 'cause I'm not sure they're going to see it that way. So I have a feeling it's going to fall on us. And so when I first started thinking about this, all I was thinking about is, okay, how am I going to make them be there? And what am I going to do when they're not? And when I was in the middle of this interview, it suddenly occurred to me that, maybe I need to change my own bar and my own goals. And maybe 95% attendance is not the ultimate goal for me anymore. And maybe that's not what's relevant, and being more flexible. And, given what Jennifer said about being kind, I don't think I would be unkind, but I feel like, if I've got to think of more ways to accommodate students who can't be there for different reasons. Because I think our view on mandatory attendance of any sort is not going to be enforceable going forward. I feel that pretty strongly. So that's one of the things I'm kind of wrestling with. And in terms of how I'm going to do exams, I'm still thinking about that one. So
it is quite tricky, and we've just finished our exam cycle for the last academic year, and it's been tough for both students and staff, right? Especially those who are used, like in economics, often to closed book, kind of textbook based exam, that kind of thing, learning how to write different kinds of questions where it's all open, you can collaborate, whatever, all kinds of lessons to be learned there. And it is going to be tricky for both students and staff. Jennifer, I'm going to come to you if that's okay, just because there is this recurring question about empathy and kindness and so on. There was a question following on from this about, the grace, the kindness that we would like to see sometimes is difficult to scale up, and especially in econ, where we very often have huge classes, right? So simple things like there's a deadline, you miss it, it's okay, you can submit it later. When you have 800 students, 10 submitting each week, it becomes a huge thing, right? So there are lots of little practical things. Is there anything you could recommend to lecturers who are facing issues like this, who want to be, but just there are practical logistic issues?
Yeah, I mean, Bill put into the Q&A response that would be the first thing, right? Is that make sure that flexibility is built into your course policies to begin with. That you have, the bigger your class, the more important it is to have things like, I'm only going to, if you're going to have weekly assignments, then I'm going to drop the, certain percentage of them. Or if you miss a midterm exam, you can put that weight on your final. To have policies themselves that already build that in, so that when things come up for individual students, you're not dealing with the individual asks. And that also, I think, addresses, Doug had a similar question about sort of students. There are some students who will be very vocal and great about advocating for themselves, and other students who would never dream of asking for that exception. And so having those things built into your policies, I think, is really the easiest way. That does mean that you have to have a course design that allows for that, right? And I will just wrap into that something else that someone asked. Sylvia, hi Sylvia. Sylvia was my grad school roommate. About students who may not be as well prepared, right? So if you didn't learn this year about the need for formative assessment, low stakes kind of things that you can do on a weekly basis, that you can do online, that you can set up to be automated, all of those things. That's one way, right? Making sure that you're asking students often how they're doing. Do they have the knowledge and skills that you are expecting them to have in this next module that we're going to do, in this upcoming section of the course? Which also, like, the more of those small assessments that you have, the easier it is to say, we're just going to drop X number right at the end of the semester. And having, a couple of big high stakes exams that students then freak out over, right, if they miss them, or feel more pressure to cheat if you've only got a few high stakes things, that really doesn't serve anyone. right? And so I would really encourage people to think about your course design just from the get-go.
That's a really great answer. And I have to say something because there's been a few comments and questions. Some of them I can recognize coming from UK people. The UK setup is a little bit different because we have much more regulation, many more rules. And, you know, as instructors, we can't just say, I'll just drop this. You know, it has to be sort of, there's all kinds of regulations around this. But I think that's where the course design is even more important, that you make those decisions, hopefully at an institutional level, if not at a department level, but in a way that, you know, it's clear to students from the beginning. So it's not doesn't have to be a reaction or anything. It's built in from the beginning. And perhaps I have to say, having moved from the US to the UK, one of the only good things I think about the strict regulations is that I don't have to say, you know, if you try to convince me more, then I allow you, and I don't allow the people who don't actually do that. So it's there. I can't do anything about it. It applies to everyone. So I can be, you know, that's one of the things that frees up instructors, I guess, to do. But because course design has come up, and it is going to be even more important going forward, if I can come to you, Derek and Josh, I'll come to Derek first. You know, what are you going to be, or what have you been telling instructors about not just addressing the, you know, only the specific problems that have come up, but sort of designing in a way that you don't keep having to sort of react to new shocks coming up? Or is there a way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no silver bullet, but I think about the faculty in the spring of 2020 who were already using some online elements in their teaching. So they had a course blog, or they had started using Slack or something, or even just some really intentional uses of their course management system. They had an easier time pivoting online because they and their students were already using some of those tools. And so they could just lean into those tools a little bit more, right? I talked to faculty who were using Slack or Microsoft Teams, and they had already been establishing some sort of social presence through these online tools. So when they needed to continue having social presence fully online, they were already kind of used to doing it. And so that's one of my pieces of advice and this gets back to Tom Tobin likes to, he's a great advocate for universal design of learning and the kind of +1 principle, right? If you can go ahead and plan to have 2 different ways to do as many things as you can, then you've just got some built-in flexibility, right? If there's some kind of challenge. And so I mentioned earlier the, you know, inclusive participation in class, right? We're used to having students raise their hand and speak out verbally, but when we teach on Zoom, we realize that a good text chat is just as valuable to their learning and to the kind of cohort's learning as verbal conversation. And so what if you find a way to continue to have a back channel in your classroom so that students can participate in either of those modalities? Or some students aren't great live, but they're fantastic asynchronously on discussion boards, right? And so if you start to kind of build some of these options into your course and value them in ways that we've learned to do this year, then I think you're in a better position to make some changes if there is some type of crisis that you have to respond to.
That's a great answer. And I think, you know, a lot of sort of terms have been thrown around about high flex and all kinds of things that I'm now completely confused about what they actually mean. But I like the word adaptable, and that's what we kind of use, that if you, yeah, the built-in flexibility. So it's not about necessarily flexing between online and in person, but just a sort of systemic flexibility that would help. Josh, kind of along the same lines, if I can come to you about with a kind of a devil's advocate question, if that's okay. That, sure. I mean, definitely amongst my econ colleagues, there are plenty of people who just still think, unlike Gail, that online is evil. I'm not going to do this unless I'm forced to. I'm not, yeah, I didn't see anything, for whatever reason, I didn't see anything that makes me think that this is okay. And I'm just going to be intransigent at this kind of thing. How do you talk to those people? How do you sort of, you know, figure out what do you say, first of all? Do we just leave them to themselves, or what do we say? One of the reasons, one of the lenses for thinking about this perhaps is what we've discovered, at least at UCL this year, is that the thing that students complained most about was when different courses in the same degree program looked totally different. So the students I view, they were like, are you guys not talking to each other? Why don't you learn from each other? You know, it was insane. And I have to say, I was very embarrassed by the whole situation. It really felt like we didn't have our act together, even though there were excellent examples of best practice. It's just that it didn't look like it was systematic because there were people going off and doing their own thing.
Right. Okay. Well, I think the first thing I would do is have a conversation with the people or person who is saying that online is still evil, because there can be multiple reasons for that. So if part of the reason is that they just didn't feel like they could engage with students in the same way, that there are lots of different things that we could talk about, you know, as Derek was mentioning, social presence, instructor presence, you know, just helping them to find strategies to increase that that aspect of teaching that they really value. If, on the other hand, the response is, and this I think ties in with something we were just talking about with course design, if the response is rooted in a previous approach to teaching as content delivery, I can't deliver content in the same way in online classes as I used to, then that's an opportunity to talk about, which I think, and this is why I think it connects, because this is what we have been able to talk more about over the last year than I have seen us been able to talk about prior to that, which is focusing more on the learning and the learning activities and how you do that in different environments rather than teaching as delivering content to people. And so if it's rooted in that, then that's a different conversation that we can have. And so I think it depends on the perspective, but there are routes that we can go with faculty development no matter what.
We have just over 5 minutes left, I think. So I just wanted to ask all of you kind of the same question, which is either if you have been teaching, which bits of the online universe would you like to keep? If you have no restrictions, you know, face-to-face is totally fine. You could completely go back to sort of traditional if you wanted to. And also, do you have any either personal preference or advice for others in terms of sort of large group teaching? So big sort of service courses or mandatory courses and things like that, versus smaller things that are more discussion based. And so there could be an argument for online versus in person, just in terms of sort of the nature of the class. Gail, can I start with you, please?
Yeah, you know, for me, my most successful online experience was with my small class that was synchronously taught through Zoom. And that's the one where I flipped it. And so since I had already made recordings, it was an honors section of micro principles. They would watch the recordings, and then in class, we would do that flip model and do a lot of different, more in-depth discussion. I assigned a lot of different articles. The spring was like a current event extravaganza in terms of policies and things that were going on when the presidential administration changed. So there was just tons of stuff to talk about. And honestly, for my smaller classes going forward, I could see myself, even if we're face-to-face, every now and then throwing in a course, a day through Zoom. If I want to have a different kind of discussion. In my senior seminar, the fluidity and the immediacy when you're in Zoom to be on your own computer and run a regression. Like, okay, let's re-specify that you could do in the classroom, but I wasn't able to do it as quickly. Right. So I think those were the features that really stood out to me that I do want to keep doing going back into the fall. You know, and I thought, you know, there are days where I don't teach because I'm sick, but if I'm not too sick, I could actually teach them through Zoom and cough all over my computer and what the heck. So I mean, that's one thing that has stood out to me. Someone in the chat box also talked a little bit about office hours. And I think virtual office hours have really increased our accessibility to students. And so I definitely want to maintain that as well.
That's a great response. I was going to say, if you're on Zoom, then I don't have my computer with me is not going to be a thing, right? So you can actually use that as well. I do have to warn people who have small children. My younger son has entered my class of dancing. So, but students think that's fine, right? Otherwise they think you're robots or something. So that's all I have. Jennifer, if I can come to you about, you know, what kind of things do you think work better online, or what kind of things, if we had no restrictions whatsoever, would be better to have online versus in person?
So I feel like I shouldn't try to answer this because I haven't actually been teaching this year because I'm now an administrator. But I will say, and this is come up in the chat as well, I love the back channel. I mean, the chat, and this is something that I have noticed in meetings, but I know from talking to lots of my faculty colleagues, it happens in classes too, that it gives students an opportunity to ask questions, make comments, have discussions that they would not have in a face-to-face class, right? That they will put things in the chat that they would never raise their hand to say, and they can do it without disrupting the flow of the conversation. So finding ways to continue that back channel, even in a face-to-face situation, whether it's a class or a staff meeting, I actually think is really useful. And thank you. There were both Josh and Derek put links in the chat with some pointers of places to look for other options if you're not on Zoom for back channel software.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I think Maddie will kick us off soon because we have a little bit of a break before our first session of presentation starts. And I can see that Derek and Josh have been very busy on the chat. I'm just gonna end by thanking the audience for being such a fantastic back channel interactor. So we were modeling what we said. So that's been fantastic. The next session starts at in 9 minutes now, I guess. You should have the link to that. And then after that, we have a network mixer. Today it's run by Echo 365, and I don't know, 360, sorry, I don't know if many of you have used it, perhaps more in the UK than in the US. But one of the things that they do have, which I've used for a long time, which was made it easier for me to sort of pivot this year, was the back channel. So all sort of fitting it into place. I have to say, as someone who's used it before, every year I worry that no one's going to listen to me because it's all in the back channel. I feel like I need to calm down a little bit about that. It's all okay. I'm there. You know, there's different purposes for all of those things. So hopefully we can take some of these things forward. Just to remind you again that we will collect the questions, you know, the ones that haven't been answered, and we'll try to answer them and post as well. And then finally, just before ending the session, I wanted to thank the student support, so Yifeng and Yasmin, and the student supporters, partners, sorry, June and Juyi, and of course Maddie, who's the magic behind everything. Network mixer, but then before that, there is a session after this. Thank you very much to the panelists. That was fantastic. Do remember that we have breakout sessions during the network mixer, so you can continue this discussion. This just seems like the start of a discussion rather than the finish. Thanks very much, guys. Bye-bye.